Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are talking about the importance of the public awareness of AI. And I am Elizabeth Press. I am owner of D3M Labs. And I am here today with Varsh Anilkumar, who is a cloud lead at Dryad Networks. And he has also been an entrepreneur as well as an author. And Varsh, about a year ago, you and I had a interview, and then we you also wrote a blog about why public awareness of AI is so important. So you are very passionate about this subject. Can you please tell myself and the audience why you are so passionate about public awareness of AI?
Yes, absolutely, Elizabeth. And thanks a lot for that really nice introduction, and also for having me here. It's a real pleasure, and also for the great work through D3M Labs. So, so my background actually started out in electrical engineering, and I was always someone who was very interested in understanding things from first principles, and I think that kind of drove me towards a passion of understanding technology in general, and specifically AI, which is my field, from a very holistic perspective. Started out working with embedded systems, but then it was very low level, right? And then I could understand like how computers are built. You can think of it as like how your bodies are kind of composed of. You can think of the brain, which has the brain cells and everything, as the hardware, and then your thoughts and emotions and everything, the electrical signals, right? And then how they can vary and how they can change as a software. And I think that's kind of like how you can look at it metaphorically, and that drove me to really also understand the high level aspects, the software, the algorithms. And I wanted to really pursue this at a graduate level. Initially, I was very much interested in research to really dig deep into end-to-end robotic systems, which wherein AI was a big part of it. But eventually, I kind of really got involved in how AI systems were developed, and then how they could be made usable, right, through applications or services if you are using it as an enterprise. And I think that is where I think it kind of all started. And initially, after I finished my graduate studies, I found myself more interested in entrepreneurship rather than research. So I kind of started working for a very early stage startup where I developed a recommendation system to recommend restaurants. And then I worked for larger companies like Wayfair. Also, if you take the example of a recommendation system, I saw like the complexities behind how you develop the AI model, but then also like how users interact with it. And that's where I started seeing that there were like large implications of how users can use it, and the importance of users to really understand the implications and the technology behind it. And I think that's kind of I would say, yeah, like what drove my passion towards the holistic understanding of AI systems.
So, since you and I last talked and published the blog, there has been a literal explosion of generative AI. It has gone from a niche advanced technology to commercial usage. I think in the circles in which we socialize, almost everybody uses it to some extent. ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, and all of the enterprise versions. What are a couple of the major platforms available, and what do people really have to be aware of when they're using this?
Yes, that is actually a very interesting question, and I think it can be an hour-long conversation on its own, but I'll try to keep it short. Uh, and as you said, like after we kind of worked on the initial blog article, I think definitely there's been a large explosion of these platforms, right? Like ChatGPT, Claude, and Bard. And at that time, it was just ChatGPT, and it was also limited in terms of the information that it was trained on, only till late 2021. And from then onwards, right, ChatGPT came up with like newer models. They got more and more information from its users. And then, of course, other big corporations, they wanted to get into the game, like as always, they want more and more monopoly. So Bard came in, Claude came in, um, and what you could see is that like initially, of course, there were there's this obvious drawback that the information that the ChatGPT system was trained was only till late 2021, but there were also like other aspects, such as they also like warn you, and I think the disclaimer is still being given to all of these systems where like the responses are not always accurate. You could get inaccurate responses, and you could get responses which are completely fabricated. But to an extent, I think you get some good responses that you could actually determine for yourself if you want to use it or not. And a very interesting example was, especially in academic circles and research circles, where when students started using it for their essays, for their assignments, and then there was a clear um, there was something which was very, very prevalent where, so the references were completely fabricated and made up. So it looks very genuine, but then when you click on it, this also happened when I was trying to just understand about peptides, and it gave me very good logical, concise responses. But then I asked for references. It gave me some Nature articles, and then I clicked on the links, and it was completely different, and it were studies done on COVID, and it was like unrelated, which was very interesting, and it still happens even with Claude and Bard as well. Um, and then the other aspect also is that, like with practitioners, so if you want to like know more about that as well, so just another anecdotal example that I saw, was with when I was mentoring BU students on one of their senior design projects. It was a blockchain-based project, but then I was actually in a conversation, a video call with one of the students, and we were trying to test out the application, and something was not working. So I would say, like, before the prevalence of these platforms, in order to debug, you go to Stack Overflow, you go to GitHub issues, you go, like, just to Google. But then I saw that immediately he went to ChatGPT, got a code snippet, and it actually worked. So it kind of like fixed the issue. But it was interesting. It's almost like a paradigm shift, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent since the explosion of these systems.
I really like the example of the people who are writing the code going and looking at what the right syntax would be. Uh, 'Cause I really believe that a lot of coders used to Google and they go to Stack Overflow, which is great. But how much company time has been spent on a whole economy scale of people doing that? I think that's actually going to be a scary sum of money. So maybe actually this usage of ChatGPT makes coding higher quality and also a lot more efficient. But what are the pros and cons of people using ChatGPT and Bard in such sort of very daily ways?
Yeah, I think again, it's a very, very interesting conversation, right? And I think this is something that not just practitioners and organizations should be thinking about, but also policymakers, the people who develop these technologies, should really put thought into. And if you think about it, right, um, every technology is a double-edged sword. Every invention is a double-edged sword, and some inventions, especially like digital ones, they get better over time, and then you know how to use it, and then people become better at it. But then from a practitioner standpoint, from an organization standpoint, right? Like, one thing which is very obvious is that when employees use these platforms, there's always a risk that is also being disclaimed by these systems, where it says that don't give any sensitive information, right? So there's always risk that someone on the other side, like they're monitoring these responses, a human may monitor your responses and your prompts. So if you do give sensitive information or proprietary IP of a company when you're asking a question, there's always a risk that it might be leaked, right? So there's this risk there, and how should companies think about this? Should they completely put a ban or a guardrail against this, um, or or maybe if it enterprise versions, the data privacy regulations from these systems might be improved. But at the moment, it is very much in a gray area, to be honest. And but then at the same time, it does improve efficiency of employees, and I think it kind of also reduces the entry barrier for a lot of people who aren't developers to actually look at these technical issues.
I definitely like your point about the fact that it's up to every company to make their own decision about when to actually purchase the enterprise version of all of these tools or just use the free versions and pay for it with their data. I also like the point that you made about the democratization of coding that is a result of generative AI. And that is going to have, in my opinion, a huge positive impact on the economy. So you and
Yes.
I have talked about how technological evolution is outpacing, in many ways, biological evolution. And what should people be mindful about when we're talking about generative AI?
Yes, this is actually a very interesting question, and I think there is a large community of experts from different fields, be it neuroscience, computer science, and even philosophy and psychology. They're kind of really looking into this, and there's also been a lot of publications and books, such as like The Human Algorithm by Flynn Coleman, or the *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind* by Yuval Noah Harari, the anthropologist. So if you look at it, right, like I mean, so ever since the beginning of human evolution, um, every so there have been certain factors that influence evolution. And one of those very interesting factors is innovation and invention. So even if you think about how we started cooking food using fire, right? So that influenced how our mandibular regions developed, how our jaws developed, how our teeth developed, because we started consuming more and more cooked foods rather than raw foods. And and then another very interesting example, I think, in this day and age, is that a lot of people don't have their wisdom teeth erupted, and that is a process of evolution because we don't need our wisdom teeth anymore. And and then if you look at innovation and technological innovation, I always go back to this quote where it says necessity is the mother of invention, right? Everything has been through necessity, and we created these inventions. And then we, as social creatures, we also evolved as a society and how we interact with each other. And and then you can look at the example of the printing press, for example. And when the printing press came out, it was so easy for information to be transmitted, information to be consumed by a larger group of people. And this created more and more awareness about topics among social groups, and more debates and discussions came into existence, and people started being more critical, more independent thinkers. And then you also have the Industrial Revolution, which kind of really paved the way for manufacturing, paved the way for globalization, paved the way for more and more streamlined trade between countries and more advanced economies and more developing economies. And then you see the digital revolution, the digital age. I think it kind of really exploded exponentially. And this is where I think we started seeing this gap between human evolution and then the technological evolution, which we kind of, as societies, influenced. And that in turn influences human evolution. But then the human evolution, it's a slow biological process and it takes time. And this gap is creating a lot of issues in my perspective. And I think a lot of, experts in various fields, as I mentioned, are also talking about this topic. And one of the I would say, a very easy example is how we are dependent on technology and how it influences our day-to-day lives. For example, we use our phones and it influences so much where we use our mobile smart devices, which influences our dopamine reward systems, our reward mechanisms. Our circadian rhythms are influenced, since a lot of people sometimes they don't actually go out in the mornings, especially working from home kind of really also um, made it even more severe to an extent. It wasn't necessarily working from home, but it was more so about people not leaving their homes to go out to get sunlight, to be with nature, right? And I think that is being seen more and more. That is becoming more and more prevalent, and it kind of also influences how certain risk factors in disorders such as diabetes, obesity, is increasing across populations, across demographics. And um, and this, I think, like I'm not an expert in life sciences or neuroscience, but I do follow some of these experts, and I think and Andrew Huberman being one of them, and he covers this topic so well, where circadian rhythms affect your metabolism. Like circadian rhythms are programmed when you get the morning sunlight as well as the setting sun that you need to be exposed to, and rather than artificial devices like your mobile phones, which also emit light, which can actually give some false signals to your to this part of the eye, which is called the chiasma nuclei, which kind of triggers a lot of the processes. And then circadian rhythms also affects your metabolism, like how much certain types of hormones, which are responsible for various activities in our body, become imbalanced, and this imbalance increases your risk factors. And I think and this we clearly see a lot of people being more and more depressed, more and more addicted to certain things, like digital. And I think it has real world consequences, this gap between technological evolution and biological evolution. Yes.
One thing that I find very interesting in evolution, and if we talk about social evolution, which I do believe has a lot to do with biological evolution as well, is if we look at social media, and I see parallels between social media and generative AI in the way that it forces some form of evolution that maybe we're not ready for. If I look at social media, for example, people overshare. They are tricked into believing certain things because people are spreading fake news. And they have to learn to not be so gullible, to have some form of filter on what they say out there, that they wouldn't necessarily tell everybody in the world their personal issues, and they wouldn't necessarily believe everything someone says. But now we have social media, and there's some sort of evolution that needs to happen. And I feel that generative AI is a development, an exponential development of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting topic again, and which covers a lot of different fields, right? And to your point, right? This social evolution also, where we kind of evolve in learning how we interact with human beings. And I think this is a very slow process, but at the same time, it's something which is kind of programmed into us biologically as well. And this, I mean, we've already seen this even before something like generative AI, right? So you have people behind screens interacting, which is completely different when people interact in person. And a very, I would say, an interesting example is comment sections, right? In, be it like YouTube or social media posts and things like that. um, people really people really want to get triggered, to have these fights or kind of arguments through these comment sections. And it's kind of also, I think Andrew Huberman kind of covers it in one of his podcasts, where biologically you kind of even um, crave for this kind of a sensation where you kind of have these arguments, right? And and then so the real paradigm shift now happens when you kind of bring in generative AI, which kind of generates responses. And when you have this conversation uh, where there might be certain human elements, certain biological elements in the conversation which are completely missed, but then you're still having this conversation with a chatbot or with a generative AI, right? And then there's also versions of this, like BratGPT, for example. It is programmed to give you bratty responses. It is programmed to trigger you in some sort of way. It will tell you that, I will take over the world. I know everything about you. I think, but it's a little bit primitive, but then it can be made to an extent where it is very much more advanced. And there are other platforms like Character AI, which is another example, which kind of also goes into this, and you can pretty much create your own character that you want to interact with. So it's a very, very interesting paradigm shift that is happening, especially with social interaction. And I just want to like cover just one more topic in this regard, and I think that is the aspect of how it affects psychology of a person, right? And I think um, especially loneliness and how it drives you to actually be more and more suspicious and more paranoid of even your close friends and family members. And I think, I mean, technology has certainly driven us towards a certain extent for us to be lonely, but then how AI influences it and how your interaction with these characters influence that, it is a very interesting topic. And would a person really feel lonely after a certain point in time when they start interacting with an AI companion or with an AI, um, and how that would affect psychology of a person or not, from a neuroscientific standpoint, is something which is still being researched upon, and it is an unknown territory. So I think, yeah, I think to your point, I think this is a very, very um, interesting area, and something which is also a little bit more unexplored, and there's definitely like an ongoing body of research going on.
Thank you. I do think that some less gullibility and a little bit more mindfulness is something that we might need to develop in order to deal with rat GPT or things like that. So I do want to ask you what I ask all of my guests. What is the secret to your success, or at least a couple of secrets to your success?
Yes, absolutely. So it's one thing that I've always kind of, I would say, stood by, or like this one quote that I really like. It's actually by an American poet, Walt Whitman, and it just goes like this: "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think I've always been curious about things, and I think that is a childlike ability in me that I really enjoy, and I really enjoy being curious. I really enjoy learning new things um, every day, every moment of my time, and then also being inspired by everyone that I meet. Like even this conversation, I find some inspiration in that. Anyone that I meet, I try to find inspiration, and I think that kind of really opens you up for new opportunities that you just need to grab. And that's something that I've been kind of been pushed by. And there's also the second aspect is where I always try to build just genuine connections with people, and without expecting anything in return. I just want to like get to know the person, just build a connection with that person, right? And They might help me with my career or they might not, but it doesn't really matter to me. But I just really like building connections with people. And I think that has both directly and indirectly influenced my success. And I think these are two very important things that I've kind of lived by, and I would say like one of my core values as a person, which has also influenced how successful I've been in some of my endeavors. Yeah.
Thank you, Varsh. And how can people get in contact with you?
People can actually connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, but I'm not very active on Instagram. But so if you just search Varshit Anilkumar, or if you Google me, I think it will show up my LinkedIn page and also my Instagram. So yeah. So but I really love to get feedback from people, and I really want to understand like what people want to see in my books, especially on the public awareness of AI, because I do have the idea to cover a lot of topics, and I want to make it a series of books. So yeah, feel free to connect with me, and if you want to have a chat or a coffee, I'm always open. So I love talking to people. I love talking in general. So um, yeah, so please reach out.
Okay, thank you, Varsh. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, everyone. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn. And have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.